Hey y'all, welcome to the podcast. If you're brand new, my name is Savannah and I'm happy to have you. Just a quick little disclaimer, if you are someone who gets easily offended or you don't like it when your worldview gets challenged, this episode may not be for you. However, I encourage you to stick around because it's my hope that I might challenge you to step outside your box, even if it's just for a minute. So, if you listened to the last episode, you heard me say that I am sick to death of talking about COVID. Well, we're going to venture into another topic that I'm just almost bored of, and that's racism. And hearing that might come as a shock to those of you who follow me on TikTok, because you know this is a topic I cover quite extensively. And that's because while I am kind of bored with it, I'm also very fascinated by the sociological aspect of it. I just want to understand why we as Americans hold skin color in such high esteem, because I don't get it, because it's so superficial. And it's 2021. At this point, we're all so dang mixed. Does it really matter? I don't know. I have a lot of questions. I want answers. And I feel like as Americans, we don't give ourselves enough grace for how far we've really come. You know, it's 2021. It's not the 1960s anymore. The world has definitely changed. The South has definitely changed. I'm a Southern female. So I think we're so quick to want to judge ourselves by the sins of the past. You know, the history of this country, it's beautiful, it's ugly, it's tragic, it's scary, it's sad, it's joyful, and it's young. I just don't think we give ourselves enough grace for how far we've come. That's just my personal opinion. And then this last year and a half, my goodness. Racism in general has just lost all its meaning because it's profitable and it's politically charged. You know, it's what drives media stories. They will completely ignore one story, but yet will pick up a story that implies or looks like racism in a heartbeat and run it over and over and over and over and over again until our ears bleed. And then politicians, when they have nothing of substance to say, they will cue racial division like it's a stage play. It's insulting that politicians think because I'm Black, they can just say keyword racism and it will just get my attention. And I'll listen to whatever they say if they say the right things. The last 18 months have just been one big identity crisis. For me, especially. I mean, I can only speak on my experience because, on one hand, I just want to live my life. I just want to be me. I just want to do whatever it is I want to do. But at the same time, I have to keep my Blackness in mind because everyone else is keeping it in mind. And it's frustrating because before 2020, I didn't care. I didn't care about the color of my skin. It didn't matter to me. It had no bearing on my choices, my life. But now it's like, who is Savannah? She doesn't matter. It's Black girl. I feel like that's the first thing people see when they see me is the color of my skin, and then they want to act accordingly. It's disheartening. I just want to go back to where all that mattered was my name, my accomplishments, and what I bring to the table. But what I want to talk about is kind of the flip side of that, because as frustrating as it is for me, I'm wondering how frustrating it might be for white people in America, especially white people in America who didn't care about skin color before 2020, didn't care about all these superficial things, and now all of a sudden are being pressured to care. Because now it's, how do I talk to this person because they're Black? How do I say the right things? I have one girl that I used to mentor. She posted something on her Instagram story talking about how to approach the subject of slavery with a Black person as if we all feel the same way about the past and we all have the same little trigger in our brain when we hear these, buzzwords. It's insulting. And as irritating as it is for me, I'm just wondering how frustrating it is for people who are white. I mean, what's it like? Your skin color didn't matter before 2020. Now it matters. Now your skin color determines who you are, where you've been, where you're going, how you think. It sucks, doesn't it? It doesn't make any sense. You're fighting this battle between the reality you want to live in and the reality of the culture that we're all trying to survive in. I'm just curious. So that's what this is about. I want to hear from those white voices. So, what even is racism? Before we go any further, we have to establish some kind of understanding, a foundation, so to speak, on what this word actually means, because this is the hot button debate on TikTok. People trying to define, redefine the word, and figure out where they fit in the middle of it, or trying to make it so they don't fit at all. So I'm on Wikipedia right now. Don't knock Wikipedia. It's basically just a site that pulls from other sources and then creates one single document. And their definition of racism they got from a paper, 2 books, and Oxford Dictionary. And they're saying racism is the scientifically false belief that groups of humans possess different behavioral traits corresponding to physical appearance and can be divided based on the superiority of one race over another. It may also mean prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against other people because they are of a different race or ethnicity. Modern variants of racism are often based in social perceptions of biological differences between peoples. These views can take the form of social actions, practices, or beliefs or political systems in which different races are ranked as inherently superior or inferior to each other based on presumed shared inheritable traits, abilities, or qualities. So, that's how we define racism. That's what the dictionary says. If you read any kind of paper or book, an encyclopedia, you're going to get the exact same definition. But what we're seeing on TikTok and Twitter are people trying to redefine the definition, because now what you see a lot of is, racism is prejudice plus power. The issue with this definition is no one can seem to agree what power means. No one wants to define power. It's prejudice plus power. And what comes after that is the idea, well, Black people can't be racist because racism is prejudice plus power, and Black people don't have power, which is problematic. But we can get into that either later in this episode or in another episode, because I could go off on that topic. But how do we define power? Are we talking about the President of the United States? Are we talking about congressmen and women? Are we talking about a teacher, a principal? Are we talking about a parent, a leader, a mentor, a pastor? In, smaller social groups, so a friend group, there's always that one friend who has a little bit of power over the rest of the group, a queen bee. Like, are we talking about that? How do we define power, and what is the context? And the issue is, when you get into these discussions on TikTok and Twitter, the context in which they're trying to talk about it, it's all kind of muddled and it doesn't make any sense. And then there's the whole thing about prejudice, because those same people will say, well, Black people can't be racist, they can be prejudiced. Well, Wikipedia, our good friend, pulls their definition from the dictionary, a paper, a book, and they are saying prejudice can be an affective feeling towards a person based on their perceived group membership. The word is often used to refer to a preconceived, usually unfavorable evaluation or classification of another person based on that person's perceived political affiliation, sex, gender, beliefs, values, social class, age, disability, religion, sexuality, race, ethnicity, language, nationality, complexion, beauty, height, occupation, wealth, education, criminality, sport team affiliation, music taste, or other personal characteristics. The word prejudice can also refer to unfounded or pigeonholed beliefs, and it may apply to any unreasonable attitude that is unusually resistant to rational influence. Prejudice doesn't sound like a good thing either. But there's the issue in that when we read the definition of racism, prejudice was included. So what we can deduce is that racism is a type of prejudice, because race is also in the definition of prejudice, that the word is often used to refer to a preconceived, usually unfavorable evaluation of classification of another person based on that person's perceived, a whole list of words, one of them being race. And prejudice based on race is racism. So it all makes no sense how racism is prejudice plus power, but Black people can't be racist, they can only be prejudiced, yet racism is a type of prejudice. I can't make it make sense. But my theory is that people are trying to redefine the word racism to justify their own ignorance, to justify their own prejudice. Because if I can make it so that I am not included in this definition, then what I'm feeling, what I'm doing, what I'm saying is okay. Because if you're not on TikTok, well, if you are on TikTok, well, you know that there is a lot of racism against white people on TikTok, and TikTok just allows it. You can't even, I mean, reporting it is just useless. Some of the names these kids have come up with: Snow Roach, Mayo Monkey, Snow Possum, and now it's colonizer, calling any white person or person who looks white a colonizer, which is a whole separate topic. But we know that racism isn't prejudice plus power. Prejudice plus power is more the definition of oppression. And then you'll have those same people come in and say, well, white people can't be racist. Well, white people can't experience racism because they've never been oppressed. But you don't need to have experienced oppression to experience racism. You know, I'm a Black American female. I was born in 1987. I'm reaping the benefits of the sacrifices before me. I've never experienced oppression. I've never been told I can't go anywhere, I can't do anything because of the color of my skin. I've never been denied access because of the color of my skin. I've never experienced discrimination in that way or segregation. I could imagine, but even my imagination wouldn't touch reality. But I've experienced bits of racism here and there throughout my life. But I've never been oppressed. So if I've never been oppressed, does that mean I can't experience racism? Or are we talking about me as a collective? You know, my individual experience is meaningless. We're talking about the overall Black experience. And am I included in that? Because other Black people in history or in present, whether here or there or wherever, have experienced oppression. I can latch onto that even if I've never experienced oppression myself. But the thing is, my childhood is not my mother's childhood. My mother experienced a whole lot more racism than I will ever experience in my entire life. My grandmother experienced more racism than I could even imagine. And I am so blessed and so lucky. I can't claim their experiences as my own. That would be deceptive. It's all strange, if you ask me. So, we have the real world definition of racism. We have the social media definition of racism, and what's truth and what's not. As far as I'm concerned, anyone can be racist. We're all human beings. We all believe the same. We all have a brain. We are all capable of looking at someone and making a snap judgment on them based on something we see, whether that's their gender, their clothes, their taste in music, the color of their skin. We are all capable of ignorance, and we're all capable of acting on that ignorance. And to sit here and say that I, as a Black woman, am not capable of ignorance in that way because of the color of my skin, well, that's just racist in and of itself. Like, what are you saying about me as a Black? What are you saying about Black people in general when you say we're incapable of forming that kind of cognitive thought? We're subhuman? Are we subpar? Are we inherently inferior? It's all muddled. It all makes no sense. But here we are. So what does this have to do with today's episode? I want to talk about racism against white people. There, I said it. Let's go. So the notion that white people can't experience racism because they've never experienced oppression, yeah, I reject that on multiple levels. Number one, I'm an 80s baby. Like I said, I've never experienced oppression in my life, but I've experienced racism. Nothing crazy, nothing to write home about, but I've experienced it. And then to say that white people have never experienced oppression, historically, that's just inaccurate. I mean, let's talk about the racism, discrimination, and prejudice that Irish, Greek, and Italian immigrants experienced around the turn of the century. Although not ethnically white, though there's no such thing as ethnically white, let's talk about the persecution and oppression Jewish people have experienced over the millennia. Every ethnic group on this planet has experienced or committed some kind of atrocity, some more recent in history, some farther down the line. Either way, you can't claim an experience that's not yours because we're not whole ethnic groups, we're individuals, and we all have our own lives and our own life stories and our own life experiences. But if you're going to sit here and claim an event you never experienced and let it dictate your present and your future, then the issue isn't other people, the issue is you. And I think this is why people want to cling to the idea that they're oppressed so bad, is because, well, if I can blame someone else, then I don't have to take responsibility for my own life. And I want to have this conversation because for two reasons. Number one, I feel like the conversation, which is kind of birthed out of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Black Lives Matter last summer, it's very narrow and it's very one-sided because no one wants to hear any other perspective. The perspective we're hearing is from a group of people. Like, no one wants to hear what I have to say, or any other Black conservative for that matter. Because what we have to say and our perspective doesn't fit that narrative. And no one wants to be derailed from the narrative. But the objective is to defeat racism, correct? But we're not going to defeat racism if we're only looking at a piece of it. We have to look at the entire picture. And when we look at the entire picture, that's going to force us to not just see how other people are being affected, but it's also going to force us to take a deeper look at ourselves and our own sin. And the second reason I wanted to have this topic is because I am so curious. For me, last year was, I want to say rough, but I would love to know what it was like for a lot of our white brothers and sisters. Because for the most part, before all of this, white people really had no sense of racial identity. Remember, y'all, this is the 21st century. This isn't the 1940s. This isn't the 1950s. This isn't the 1960s. You know, the white people of today are not their grandparents. A lot of their grandparents had to unlearn some awful thoughts and behaviors. And once they unlearn those, they pass that to their children and then to their children. So you have right now a large population of white people who don't see their skin tone as having any value. And now all of a sudden they're being told that their skin tone matters. It dictates who they are, the way they think, the way they talk, the way they relate to other people. And this is contradictory to everything they've been told since birth. And I'm just curious what it's like to live in that weird, for lack of a better word, dichotomy. What's changed for you? Do you see people differently? Do you feel pressured to see people differently? Because now it's all about see skin color first, that was the upsetting part for me. Is before all of this, I was Savannah. Now I'm Black girl. Now it's people want to tiptoe around me and watch what they say. And it's frustrating because it's like I'm invisible and all that matters is the color of my skin. And I'm wondering for other white people, have they felt that struggle as well? You know, it's one struggle, just two sides of the same coin. Have you felt like you've been discriminated against or you've been treated differently? Have you experienced racism in ways you've never experienced it before? Have people called you racial slurs? No one's ever called me a racial slur to my face. Never. I've never experienced that. I mean, people call me dumb things all the time online. You know, the typical coon, Uncle Tom, house Negro, mammy, stuff like that. But Never to my face. And stuff like that doesn't bother me, and that's stuff I've been hearing since I was a kid, so I know it's just pure ignorance, people living in their own bubble and they've never really experienced life outside of whatever it is their parents taught them. But for someone who's never experienced racism in that way, I'm wondering what's that like? And so this was one of the topics in my Google form. I called it Silence White Voices. I kind of explained it in a YouTube video, and I'm going to read some stories today. And I got a lot for this topic. This was the most popular topic, so I want to read as many stories as I can. Not all in this podcast, so be on the lookout for TikTok videos and YouTube videos with some of their stories, but we're going to share some of these stories today, so buckle up. Let's go. On Halloween 2011, my adopted pregnant Black sister was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. She left behind a boy 2.5 and a baby girl 10 months. I decided I was going to foster, then adopt them. After 1 month, the state approved my fostering the children. My fiancé and I picked up the children, and I thought, with a smile, here starts a new and wonderful life. Boy, were we shocked. First, we were bullied by the parents of the guy who killed her. Then we had to learn how to cope with the anger and confusion of the 2.5-year-old boy. It took us almost 2 years of learning, loving, and dealing with all the visits from DSHS. Those visits would trigger the little boy. Then starts the trial. Oh, how my eyes were open. First, the killer's family told us my sister deserved to be killed. Then the dirty looks from the killer himself. Second day of the trial, the judge, who was Black, asked who was going to be adopting and raising the children. The prosecutor told him I was. The judge said, "Oh, that's a bad decision because she is white and not worthy of raising Black children." I was crushed and shocked. Then came sentencing. The judge said he was going to sentence him to 20 years for the double murder because he felt sorry for the killer due to his parents not raising him right. Again, hurt and shock. So we decided to just move past the hurt from the trial and do the best we could for these 2 children. By the way, I am now 60 and have 3 biological sons and 4 grandkids who all adore these 2 kids. Well, on we go living our life. We had so many Black people tell us we were horrible for raising Black children and that they should be with a Black family. I said no, they should be with a family who loves them and wants the best for them. We get dirty looks still from Black people and get asked questions from white people as to how we have such young kids when we are older. They never mention that the children are Black and we are not. I was raised to treat everyone equal, and I guess I was living in a bubble thinking everyone else was raised the same. I have to admit, when we go out and a Black person, couple, or family approach, I get really nervous because I know what is probably coming. The hate and disgust about us being white and raising Black children. But let me tell you this, I have no regrets with our decision and would do it again. Love is love no matter the color of your skin. I hope in what is left of my life I see a good change so people don't base an opinion on the color of one's skin. Laura from Washington State. Now, this is a personal pet peeve of mine. People who think they have the right to comment on how someone should or shouldn't raise their children, especially with respect to transracial families and transracial adoption. It just irks my nerves. Because I see this on TikTok quite a bit. And it's usually your older Black women who think it's their right to tell another white woman how they're supposed to raise their Black child, how they should be doing their hair, asking asinine questions like, are you going to tell them about their culture? How are they going to know about their culture? How are they going to know who they are? Or one that I've seen quite a bit, how are you going to raise him to be a strong Black man? I take a couple issues. One, the idea that as Black men and women, as Black children, that we are expected to be a certain way based on the color of our skin. That irritates me on a personal level, because that's something I grew up experiencing. And then the idea that skin color and culture go hand in hand, and they don't. Especially not in the United States of America. We're literally one big melting pot. The culture down south, the culture up north are two completely separate cultures. The Black people down here and the Black people where I grew up in the Carolinas, not the same people, very, very different. And the idea that Black people are to be a certain way, live a certain way, think a certain way, express culture a certain way, simply because of the color of our skin, irks all of my nerves. All of them, even the last one. Culture does not come from skin color, people. Culture comes from your environment. It is the environment in which you are raised, and culture is not fixed, it's not stagnant. I mean, what even is Black culture? What are we talking about? The way we do our hair? I don't have any hair. I get it cut because I don't like dealing with it. Music that we listen to? Or, are we talking about like history? It's American history. Anyone can learn it. Anyone with access to a library or the internet can learn it. It's not difficult. What heritage are we talking about? Heritage implies something that's been passed down. What has been passed down necessarily? We're not going to sit here and say, oh, Juneteenth is Black culture. No one really cared much about Juneteenth unless you were like in Maryland or Texas. No one really cared much about it until this past year. We're not going to lie and say Kwanzaa is Black culture because that's more of a subculture of a subculture. What even is Black culture? What exactly are these Black children raised in white families supposed to be doing in order to be complete in their Blackness? Because the fact of the matter is, your culture is your parents' culture. It's whatever environment you were raised in. And your household may differ from another Black household. And why we can't accept this about one another is beyond me. But the idea that culture and skin color go hand in hand, it has to go. It's perfectly understandable and acceptable to believe that white people down south and white people up north are culturally different, yet we expect Black people across the country to be one and the same. I don't get it. I think what this lady's saying is something that's very prevalent and it happens a lot, but for whatever reason, people don't want to hear it. There are people who feel like they have a right to speak because that's a Black child, and because that's a Black child, the child somehow belongs to us, as if she's borrowing our children. It's ridiculous. How are you going to raise him to be a strong Black man? What does that even mean? What is a strong Black man? What separates a strong Black man from a strong white man? I don't get it. And then we want to treat culture like it's fixed, it's stagnant, it doesn't move. Culture changes and moves from place to place, and it's very normal for culture to be one thing, one place, go to another place, completely change as it meshes into another culture, and then become something completely different. Take box braids, for instance, because that's another hot button issue is, oh, white people wearing box braids, it's cultural appropriation. Like, whose culture are they supposed to be appropriating? Black people in America didn't invent box braids. What are box braids? It's a style of African hair braiding. That's all it is. Because you have, box braids, wet and wavy, crochet braids, micro braids. For a while, in like the early 2000s, box braids were out of style and you would get picked on if you had those thick, clunky braids. Box braids really didn't become mainstream until the 90s, yet you have people trying to claim that, oh, this is Black culture, this is something. No, this is African culture that's been shared with Black Americans and other Americans for a price. And it has also been shared with people in Europe. There are a couple accounts I follow in Russia that do box braiding, and the way they do African hair braiding, it's completely evolved to fit within their culture. That's normal. That is so normal. That's how life works. That's how culture grows. That's how culture thrives. You want to gatekeep your culture? You can only gatekeep that which you have created, but you can't stop someone from sharing their culture. And you sure as hell can't stop someone from expressing or experiencing another culture. You just can't. You have young American girls and boys who identify heavily with anime and either like Korean culture or Japanese culture. It is perfectly understandable for you to feel like there is a culture somewhere else outside of your normal that helps you to express who you are. I have a lot of thoughts, which is why I'm so quiet. I'm trying to get them all in one sentence, and it's just not happening. But this is a woman who, after a tragedy, was trying to keep her family together and was met with such disgusting opposition simply because she's white and her children are black. And people say these things because they feel like they have the right, but they don't stop to think how these black children may feel hearing these things said about the people who love them and care for them and raise them and call them family, who call them their children. All I'm saying is, mind your business. Right after the George Floyd incident, my black friend in Florida said she could no longer be my friend because I agreed with Candace Owens in that I don't believe George Floyd should be considered a martyr or some kind of saint. I think what happened to him is wrong. I think there are bad cops. I also think Black Lives Matter is just using these tragedies to push an agenda and to get rich doing it. Saying these things as a white person makes me racist now, and I have never been racist in my entire life. I loved my friend in Florida. I miss her very much. My son says I don't have many black friends because I am too white. What does that even mean? Why are we going backwards? Why is there a large part of the black community that wants to be segregated again? I am a white person that wants people of all races to have good lives and prosper by their hard work and determination. But if I say that in this environment, I am being racist. Critical race theory is very bad, but saying that makes me racist. How am I responsible for something people did before I was born? I am very afraid of where this country is headed because of race divisions. I want to do something about it, but not what they expect me to do because I don't agree with what they, extreme race divisive people, are expecting of white people. Anonymous. If you're not on TikTok or Twitter, there was probably a piece of this story that may have shook you a little bit, the part where the person says, why is there a large part of the black community that wants to be segregated again? Now, I don't know if I would agree with the large part of that statement. However, I have noticed being on TikTok that there is this group of like teens to 20s, black youth, who seem to be in favor of bringing segregation back, their understanding of segregation, because their understanding of segregation is just being separated, white schools and black schools, being separated for the purposes of healing, which we can talk about that some other time. But like I said, it's to their understanding of segregation, which makes me wonder, like, are they having conversations with their parents and their grandparents? Because education starts at home. We can't blame everything on the school system. What are these parents and these grandparents telling their children for them to seem to think that segregation is a good idea? That separating based on race is a good idea? Or that segregation is simply just us being separated, because segregation in the Jim Crow South wasn't just black people over here, white people over there, but it was white and black people being in the same place but not being able to interact. So it was white people go through the front door, black people come through the back door, white people sit up the balcony of the theater, and white people can sit at the bottom. Are we, as a society, prepared for that? Are we okay with that? We fought an entire court case to desegregate schools. And, making sure schools are diverse, it's still an issue within our country and something we're still working on. But to go backwards? I know it was very important for my mother for me to have a diverse upbringing, for me to be able to have conversations with people who are not just racially different, but come from a different background as far as the way they grew up, their religion, even the languages they spoke. She wanted me to be as well-rounded as possible. And I don't know, maybe it was within the last couple of years that I realized that not everyone's mom is like my mom. Not everyone's mom saw that as a priority, and it makes me a little sad. But this person asked some legitimate questions. My son says I don't have many black friends because I am too white. What does that even mean, to be too white? And the sad part about that statement is it insinuates that if one is too white, then what does it mean to be too black? This is something that we also see amongst a lot of young people in our culture right now, is trying to box people in by the color of their skin, telling them how they can act, how they can think, how they can speak, how they can dress. I know there are a lot of Black men and women like me who grew up where our experience with racism wasn't so much from other white kids, but it was from other Black kids. It was Black kids who were calling us racial slurs. It was Black kids who were trying to make us feel bad for being Black and being different. But that's a whole separate conversation that we can have. But something else that this person talks about, it makes me wonder, because I mentioned how for the last year and some change, it was frustrating for me to not be seen as Savannah, but for people to look at me and automatically see the color of my skin. It's frustrating that people would act differently around me because they feel like they're supposed to, they have to. It makes me wonder, on the other side, for someone who's never had to do that, who's never thought twice about treating someone the way they wanted to be treated, who's never really looked at someone and said, okay, I have to treat this person this way based on the color of their skin, now feel pressured to take all of that into consideration. It makes me wonder, what is that like for someone? How frustrating is that? How defeated do you feel? You went your whole life not really caring about other people's skin, and now you're being told that you have to care. You went your whole life not really seeing your skin color as being anything significant, and now it matters. We really are going backwards. I'm a 53-year-old white woman who grew up in the military life. My father was a 20-year Navy veteran, and I had friends from several different nationalities, and I recognized our differences, but I never thought that made them worse or better than me. We all just looked different on the outside. Oh, and some of the foods they ate were different, but that only helped my palate grow exponentially. I wouldn't say that I am colorblind, because I can definitely see that the human race has a variety of skin tones, but I look at how people treat other people. This past year, I have felt like I'm the enemy, as if most people of color only look at my white skin and think, yep, she's a racist, without even having spoken to me. I have never felt so hated in my life, and it's by people that don't even know me. But I know me, and God knows me and what's in my heart. No matter how much hate and discontent there is around me, I will continue to put on the whole armor of God every day so that I can withstand. Love conquers hate. I will love to the bitter end. Angie from Florida. I am a white-looking Syrian-Italian woman from the suburbs of Philadelphia who grew up in a very white county. I experienced extreme bullying as a child into 9th grade about my dark skin, my hairy arms and legs, and my mustache. Looking back now, I do feel that was because I was the most ethnic-looking person in my school, but I only realized that now. It only stopped when the head bully smacked me across my face in art class. It was bad. Now that I'm 40, I present more white, and it's been hard to keep my mouth shut over racial issues because I don't feel my voice matters since I look white, even though both sides of my family only immigrated here 2 generations ago, and none of them were slave owners. And I don't consider myself white, but Arab and Italian. But I never experienced outright racism until I was an adult, and it wasn't directed where I thought it would be. I witnessed outright racism when I lived for 5 years in Southwest Philly, a predominantly black community. And the way my neighbors spoke to the Asian business owners was horrifying and shocking to me. I truly couldn't understand how they could say the things they said to these beautiful, sweet people day after day. These are human beings. I can't say that out loud though, because that's not the right kind of racism that matters, so I've kept my mouth shut. I have also kept my mouth shut about the abuse I've seen by the leaders of Black Lives Matter and the author of White Fragility, turning our country against each other, while these leaders get wealthy and more black children and adults are murdered by their neighbors because we defunded our inner city police and demoralized them. I lived in the ghetto. I know how important policing is in those neighborhoods, but I can't say anything. My brother-in-law is half black, and my nephews are a quarter black, so Black Lives Matter to me. But that can be true, and I can still see the hypocrisy of Black Lives Matter movements, the racism against Asians by the black community, and the outrage I feel being categorized as a suppressor when no one in my family was here suppressing anyone. In fact, my Syrian great-grandfather escaped Syria on a boat, dressed up as a girl with his sister to escape religious persecution as Christian Syrians, and my Italian family was treated as second-class citizens 100+ years as well. But again, none of my experiences or feelings matter because to the world I look like a dark-haired white woman and my opinions are unpopular. I have never in my life thought I was better than anyone else, especially not because of my skin color. In my neighborhood in Philly, I spent many nights sitting on my front steps with my teenage neighbors, playing with each other's hair, giving life advice, and encouraging them to go to college and to stay in school. I love those kids and truly wanted the best for them. I hope we get to a point where every person's story and experiences matter regardless of what our skin color looks like from the outside. I was raised to look at all people as equal under the eyes of God and judge them by who they are and not their shade of skin color. That has absolutely nothing to do with the person I am or what I've been through or where my family came from, and that goes for all of us. Aaliyah from Pennsylvania. Angie and Aaliyah, these are some of the answers I've had to the questions I've been running through my head for the last year and some change. What has the last year and some change been like for white men and women in America? I want to know. I'm curious. I want to hear what you have to say. The only way we're going to get rid of racism and bigotry and prejudice in this country is if we talk to one another and we share our experiences. Because the idea that as a white person or an Asian person or as a Hispanic person, you can't experience discrimination in some way, shape, or form, or prejudice or racism is just false. Are you trying to tell me that as a black woman, I am completely incapable of holding a judgment against someone based on the color of their skin? How stupid do you think I am? How cognitively deficient do you think I am? That I can't make that judgment, that I can't look at something and make a judgment. It's so backwards. This is a big deal for me because I don't want to live in a world where judging people based on the color of their skin is the norm. And I certainly don't want to live in a world where judging white people by the color of their skin is now the norm and it's normalized and it's okay. Because right now it's okay. You can say what, like I said, you can say whatever you want about white people on TikTok and it doesn't get taken down. You can be as racist as you want to white people on TikTok and nothing happens. There's no consequences for it because it's not seen in our culture as a bad thing or a negative thing or even a real thing, even when it's right in front of our face. Like I said, I have so many questions. White men and women of America. Many of you who've been told from a very young age to not judge someone by the color of their skin. How does it feel to now be told that you must judge someone by the color of their skin? that before you even meet someone, you must look at the color of their skin and make sure you say and do the right thing before you even open your mouth. What is it like to be told from a young age that it's okay to be colorblind, but now you can't be colorblind? When people say they're colorblind, they're not saying they don't see color. They're saying your color doesn't matter. When someone says, I am colorblind, they're not saying, I don't see that you're different than me. They're saying your differences do not matter. But it's 2021 and no one knows what a metaphor is. What do you worry about with respect to your children? What kind of conversations are you having with your children? Many of you have never had to have a racism talk before. That kind of conversation is basically commonplace for a lot of Black boys and girls growing up. It's not something you've ever had to really think about or worry about, and that's cool. But now you do. And I hate it for you. Because the thoughts your parents put in your head with respect to race, it makes a difference. And sometimes that difference isn't always positive. How do you feel about sending your children to school in 2021? How much do you trust the teachers? Let's just put it out there. Because everyone's worried about critical race theory being taught in schools. Like, do you trust the administration? Do you trust the teachers to treat your white children with respect and dignity? That's an honest question. It's a legit question. Black parents, for the most part, there are policies in place to protect your children against racism, but there's none to really protect white children because any racism they experience gets dismissed. Is this how we're ending racism? By creating more racism? By just evolving and changing racism to look like something completely different? So many of you are listening and saying, well, now they know how it feels. Get rid of that attitude. Eye for an eye is not justice. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. You're not going to end racism by encouraging others to be racist or experience racism. Isn't that the whole privilege conversation? Because what even is privilege? Privilege basically means that person A and person B will struggle and suffer in ways that are completely different simply because they are different. As a white person, there are things you will never experience because you are not Black, and that's okay. That's life. As a woman, there are things I will never experience simply because I am not a man. As someone from up north, there are things you will never experience or understand or struggle with because your family has lived for generations in the North, whereas my family has lived for generations in the South. It's a completely different culture, completely different struggle. And instead of embracing and listening to one another's struggles, we've turned it into a contest, the oppression Olympics. Everyone wants to be oppressed. Everyone wants to be marginalized. Everyone wants to be at the bottom, but no one wants to rise to the top. It's ridiculous, man. These are some heavy stories. And like I said, this was my most popular topic. So there's a lot more to share. And what I'm hoping is that some of you were inspired to maybe share your own thoughts and your own stories. So somewhere, depending on the platform you're listening to, there is a link to my website, which will give you a link to that Google form. If you want to share your story, the topic is still available. Go ahead and submit it. I am not opposed to doing a part 2 because I want to make sure voices get heard because that's something I committed to. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking to the end, and I'll see you next time.